Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, friends, delegates, representatives of different sectors of economy and different civil society sectors. It's an honor and pleasure for me to welcome you to this second informal working group of the Leadership Dialogue 3 for Stockholm Plus 50, which is titled Accelerating the Implementation of the Environmental Dimensions of Sustainable Development. So we have gathered together now to co-create this set of recommendations, very concrete recommendations, which will inform the outcome of the Stockholm Plus 50 documents, with the objective that these recommendations will put the world on track to achieve SDGs by 2030 and probably meet the 1.5-degree target of climate change. We are very happy that today we are joined by a large number of peoples, and many of you have expressed interest in taking the floor. We are also joined by the co-hosts, Kenya and Sweden, and the co-chairs for the Leadership Dialogue 3, Finland and Egypt. A warm welcome to the co-host and the co-chairs. My name is Asad Naqvi. I'm head of the Secretariat of Partnership for Action on Green Economy, as well as the Secretariat for Green Growth Knowledge Partnership. And it is my honor that I've been moderating today's discussion. Before we invite the co-chairs for their welcome remarks, may I just reiterate the rules for today's discussions. And I would like to request the colleagues on technical side to also put them in the chat. So many of you have expressed interest in taking the floor. We are grateful to you for that. And we would like to request that you limit your interventions to 2 minutes. You will hear a bell when 30 seconds are left. And then at 2 minutes, you will hear another bell. If your statement is longer than 2 minutes, we would welcome that you submit your written statements through emails, through Google Forms, or you put it in the chat box. All 3 channels will be continuously observed and monitored, and your inputs will be included in the report of today's discussion. If you would like to submit a questions, you can do that also through the Q&A feature of the Zoom, or also through the chat function, and those will be monitored. We assume that you have looked at the background paper which was developed for the Leadership Dialogue 3, and I'm now requesting my colleagues to put the link to the background paper in the chat in case you missed it. However, after this paper was finalized and given to the translation team of the conference services, there have been progress since then, including through the informal working groups and the preparatory meeting that took place in New York. Now, before I give the floor to the co-chairs, I would like to also request that those of you who are from the member states and would like to take the floor during the round 1, which is on accelerating mobilization of finance, please raise your hands so that the technical team from the Green Growth Knowledge Platform can recognize you and put that in the list of speakers. With this, I would like to invite the co-chairs. First, let's say we go to Finland, and then we will go to Egypt for their welcome remarks. So the floor and screen is yours, Annika Lindblom.
Thank you so much, Asad, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and welcome to the second informal working group of Leadership Dialogue 3. I'm very happy to see again such a large variety of participants attending this meeting, which is about accelerating the implementation of the SDGs and other environmental commitments. As you well know, the preparatory meeting of the Stockholm Plus 50 was held in New York on the 28th of March. And I was personally very inspired by the richness of statements and proposals that we heard there. The atmosphere was very constructive, and the role of the Stockholm Plus 50 in the chain of the international meetings was clearly understood. The willingness to utilize the opportunities of the Stockholm Plus 50 to advance critical issues prior to the big conference of the party meetings on biodiversity and climate change, for instance, this year, this willingness was evident. The key themes for the Leadership Dialogue 3, aiming at accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development. They have been elaborated and further developed on the basis of the contributions from the informal working group 1 meeting and the preparatory meeting in New York, and included also in the background paper that Asad was referring to. And this background paper has been finalized and published on the website as final unedited version of the 12th of April. And this background paper includes key messages and recommended urgent actions that reflect the messages raised in the preparatory meeting. Now it is our task to continue developing and sharpening those messages in the 2 remaining informal working groups. So the key themes are pulled around 3 interconnected objectives: accelerating mobilization and scaling up finance, accelerating governance and institutional reform, scaling up partnerships, collective action, and strengthened cooperation. For the second informal meeting, I would wish to encourage participants to sharpen and concretize the messages. The concerns and challenges have now been raised. We have heard them, but we would need to move from statements to action. What are the concrete means and solutions to accelerate implementation of the environmental and sustainable development commitments? I also wish we have time to focus on all 3 themes. They are interconnected and mutually supportive. For example, mobilizing finance needs capacity and institutions. Strengthened cooperation needs financial means and institutional arrangements. So I hope we have a balanced discussion on the 3 themes that are addressed under this Leadership Dialogue 3. And in addition to sharpening the messages and finding the interlinkages, I hope we hear today solutions from south to north, and both from member states and from non-state actors in a balanced and constructive manner. After the informal working group meeting today, the UNEP Secretariat will compile the key messages and action points. Our intention is that for the 3rd informal working group on May 17th, we could already have quite a concise and well elaborated list of key messages and recommendations to discuss about and further develop. And of course, after the last informal meeting, the consolidated set of output, be they recommendations or other type of findings, results, they will be introduced to the co-hosts, Sweden and Kenya, for their consideration. So for my part, I look forward to a lively discussion and hope to have a very nice atmosphere in this informal working group meeting, as we did during the first one in March earlier this year. Now I pass over to my co-chair colleague Miranda.
Thank you, Annika. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. It's a real pleasure to co-chair and with Annika and with Finland, the 2nd informal working group. I think less than 2 months ago, we had our first informal group, and it was kind of good opportunity for all of us to share ideas and proposals. After that, we had our pre-meeting in New York that actually helped sharpen the key messages and the urgent action. This is why, as you know, I'm echoing what my colleague Annika said, we need this time, in this conversation, to tackle the action and to have direct messages, how we can implement it, how we can work together to have urgent action collectively from all countries, from all stakeholders, in order to move forward. We look forward that we hear from every participant and stakeholder to give us concrete messages to take it to Stockholm. Stockholm Plus 50, it's another opportunity for all of us to reaffirm our commitments. It's not about creating new one or new process, but also is to strengthen what we're working on in the current process. I won't take long because already, we covered all the message. We want to hear more from you. We need to have an interaction and an active participant. And we look forward to hear from all of you. Thank you, and looking forward for our discussion today. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anika, and thank you so much, Mirande. So you heard the co-chairs and their request, their ambition for two things, which I was hearing. Number one, we need sharpen the message and sharpen the recommendations. And we want to hear from all of you and each one of you so that we can carry all the voices together to Stockholm in June, so that we can really inform the outcome document based on your inputs and your suggestions. Number two, there are three areas in this informal working group, and there are 3 rounds of discussion, which will be covering the 3 topics: accelerating mobilization of finance, accelerating governance and institutional reforms, and renewing multilateralism and let's say partnerships, working together theme. All 3, as Anika was said, are interconnected and mutually dependent. Now we will move into the next round, or the first round of discussion, which is focused on accelerating mobilization of finance. For this one, I would like, number one, to say that those colleagues who have asked to take the floor, they should raise their hands and I will take their names. Before that, I believe that member states have already raised their hands and they will take the floor first. The list that I have for speakers in this round, or those who have requested to take the floor, includes Dr. Medril Zam from Bappenas of Indonesia, Ministry of Planning, Ranuka Thakur, University of Central Lancashire, Ali Mame Sasse, I apologize if my pronunciation is not correct for this name, Fadel Kabub, Arab Habullah from SEED, Arvind Kumar, Loni Gross, Ambani Holland, Prisha Kumar, and Zara Abu Taha. Please raise your hand so that the GGKP team can recognize you and unmute your mics. Now, I would like to invite Miranda to frame the discussion on how do you think that we can accelerate mobilization of finance, and where we are on this discussion based on the background paper, the first informal working group, and the prep meeting we had in New York. Over to you, Miranda.
Thank you, Asad. When we're talking about accelerating implementation, one of the main and important means of it is the finance. I'm sure everybody of you have read the key messaging and urgent action from the background paper. So I won't repeat them, but maybe I will give let me throw some food for thought and to hear back from you for real action. How we can build up in the current commitments and ensuring the fulfillment of the already established pledges. This is an important step and first action we need to hear it from you. And look for means to increase financial resources to achieve the sustainable development based on just and equitable access to financial instruments. And keeping the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. The important in bridging the climate finance gap and to provide an accurate and verified amount of the status of delivery of all the climate finance commitments. Climate finance also should involve issues of justice and equity. No one should be left behind. When we're talking about climate finance, give us thought about how to ensure the balance between the mitigation and adaptation. How we can promote innovative finance on national and international level. It's also important to hear back from you how to consider that climate swap as possible tool in financing climate change action. With declining aid in the form of grants, developing countries face a cruel dilemma, having to choose between increased climate indebtedness, and inaction. We cannot be in this situation anymore. Regional or global risk pooling mechanism, how we can work from it, how we can have concrete action for climate and key measures that be urgently taken about. We need to be able to make these resources at reasonable cost at speed. The provision of urgently needed finance for SDG in developing countries should be unconditional and science-based. Let me stop here and hear back. And I'm sure Anika, if she wants to add anything from her side. Back to you, Asad. Thank you.
Yeah, I would firstly give the floor to Anika if she would like to add from the Finland's perspective.
Thank you. Maybe just a few words. Like Miranda said, I think this has been one of the themes that has attracted a lot of interest, and no wonder the financial gap of the 2030 agenda requires all potential resource flows. And it goes without saying that we need to ensure that we fulfill the commitments for climate financing, for environment financing, for development financing. But we also need to develop new mechanisms to attract investment in sustainable development, both from the public and the private sector. And I think it is also very good that we have not only been focusing on international finance, but also wanting to understand how the domestic financial resources could be made more SDG compatible, if you like, in all countries. And of course, mobilization of private finance is a hot topic in all fields, as it is clear that the needs related to, for instance, tackling the climate crisis are much bigger than the financing that is available from the public sources. So sharing of best practices, best solutions, successful examples will be very important. And of course, when we are talking about the access to finance and scaling up of finance flows to developing countries and LDCs, we need to address also the institutional capacity of the countries, and technical assistance and capacity building of the authorities need to go hand in hand with the finance. And this brings us to the next theme of the governance, on governance reform, and underlines the interlinkages between finance and institutions, for instance, and we will go into that in more detail later. So my final wishes relates to seeking balance. So I wish to hear interventions, solutions, and recommendations from both developing countries and developed countries, as well as stakeholders from different corners of the world and sectors. And in addition to finding a balance between the North and South, it is important to balance quantity with quality. So in the context of finance, for instance, it is not only scaling up finance, but also ensuring that the money is spent to support the transition to sustainable development in all countries. So I think there's a lot, a bunch of elements that we can continue having the discussion and concretize our solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anika. So as you can see, this is probably the most rich part of the discussion, and we are starting with very rich ideas already on finance. I will not repeat them. I assume that you heard the co-chairs framing the discussion and you have seen the background paper. Given that there is a huge interest in taking the floor, may I now invite Dr. Medrilzam, Director of Environmental Affairs in the Ministry of Planning of Indonesia, to please make his statement. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Asad. Greetings to everyone around the world. Thank you very much for the very first opportunity for me to send some message here. Basically, we know that the requirement for to reach a very ambitious, our ambitious target for a green economy in the future, including how then we can reach our net zero emission targets and all other targets, require the huge investments, a huge financing. And we know that I think what we would like to suggest here, that all combinations of financing resources, including the domestic one, private investment, and also foreign direct investments, and any other kind of sources should be integrated massively to support our very big ambitions. And what I would like to say here, I think you need to recall back again our conventions, for example, in climate change, in Article 3.4, that actually climate, I would like to take an example of climate actions here. Climate action should be part of the national development programs. So what I would like to underline here, actually, the domestic resources actually can be also classified of one of the resources that can finance the requirement of our needs to reach our ambitions. And again, I would like to underline that in the conventions of climate change, the financing mechanisms actually only grants and concessions. And of course, it's not enough. In the case of Indonesia, we to reach the net zero ambitions targets, we need about 3 to 5% of our GDP, thanks to the exercise with the UN page, with Assad and all colleagues. And to reach that amount of numbers, we need not just about concessions and grants. Investment is a key, and I believe we need to underline this very strongly for the Stockholm Plus 50. How then to mobilize these investments? This is our homework. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Medril. It was great to start with your very concrete idea. For Indonesia, it takes 3 to 5% of the GDP. How do we finance it? And your message that we need to integrate all sources of financing if we really serious are to meet the target. May I now invite Ranuka to make your statement? You are mute, Ranuka.
Thank you very much. And I would definitely follow up with investment, what is already raised, and all the points which are raised, especially with the capacity building. And so I would like to say that we need to focus on our own capacity building, that is internal capacity building, especially to within the domestic resource mobilization. And we need to focus on being more efficient. And what I mean here, that we need to decrease our wastage in spending, or we need to assess our quality of spending so that we can understand that where we need to focus. And when we are talking about climate change, I would say that we need to integrate this climate change within the Sustainable Development Goals so that we can achieve more things, just not only climate change, but also because in the future, we don't know, along with the climate change, we might be coming up with many other problems, just as we had COVID recently. So we need to build our capacity to understand the future, or also make ourselves more resilient so that we can address those problems. With the domestic revenue mobilization, I would definitely say that we need to
you have 30 seconds.
All right, sorry. Especially decreasing inefficiency of quality of spending, which I already mentioned, but also strengthening effective management. And that would require fiscal transparency and accountability measures to be applied and effective tools. And for that, we will need to have data. And therefore, I think we need to become strong on data, and that would allow us to mitigate mismanagement, corruption, fraud, and particularly in procurement in low income countries. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you have a longer statement, you can submit it through the chat or through the email as well, and they will be taken into account. But thank you so much for raising and reinforcing the point on investment, but also the need to address inefficiencies, the need for fiscal transparency, and probably more data to have more informed decision making. Thank you so much, Ranuka. May I now go to Ali Mame, please? The floor is yours. If Al-Imame is not there, may I now request Fadl Kaboub from Denison University to please take the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Fadl Kaboub. I am an associate professor of economics at Denison University and the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. I will make my remarks very clear and very direct. A couple of facts and a couple of conclusions to help us accelerate climate finance and an energy transition for sustainable prosperity. The facts: climate change is primarily the responsibility of countries from the global north, if we look at CO2 emissions since the Industrial Revolution. Fact: developing countries, the most vulnerable countries, have not been responsible for climate change. We have a situation where the moral, ethical responsibility for addressing climate change necessitates climate reparations. Reparations as in, number one, acknowledging and telling the truth about these facts. Number two, offering a public apology. Number three, repairing the damage, as in transfer of financial resources, but also transfer of technology, transfer of know-how, transfer of in-kind processes that actually repair the damage. What is the damage? The damage is a global international financial system that sucks $2 trillion every year from the global south. That system cannot remain in place. Why? Because if we're talking about a global climate finance system that would transfer, say, even $100 billion a year, that doesn't work if you're also sucking $2 trillion from the other side. So we need climate reparations, transfer of financial resources, green technology, resilient food and energy systems to be built in the global south. And that also benefits the global north, because we'll be dealing with a climate refugee crisis. We'll be dealing with stranded assets, a carbon bubble in financial markets in the global north. Everyone benefits, therefore everyone must participate with whatever they can. Some countries in kind, some countries with financial resources, some countries with technical assistance. We're all in this together. Climate reparations now. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadl. Thank you so much. Yeah, very clear statement. I think that's what probably Miranda was referring to on the common and differentiated responsibilities, which is a globally agreed norm. But thank you so much for sharing your facts and figures and ideas. May I now go to Arab Habullah? My friend, Arab, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I will have 4 points to recommend there. For accelerating the implementation of environmental dimension of sustainable development, the private sector has clearly a crucial role to play. However, the focus is too often exclusively on large corporations, which are frequently the center of attention. A potential that is yet largely untapped are the small and medium enterprises and their impact as drivers of innovation that secure local jobs, protect ecosystem, and enhance local resilience. 4 points here. First, as suggested action, we need to bridge the missing middle gap by facilitating innovative financing product tailored to the need of eco-inclusive small and medium enterprises, supporting them in the scale pathway. Innovative financing product will provide finance in the range of $10,000 to $500,000, adjusting their risk and return profile to the SME segment by often blending different forms and sources of finance. 2, mobilizing climate finance for small and medium enterprises. Climate financing is one of the fastest growing investment field nowadays. Eco-inclusive small and medium enterprises create low emission alternatives, directly reduce emission, clean up the environment, and contribute to green recovery, which makes them the perfect candidate for global and national action there. However, they need to be duly recognized. Third, facilitate dialogues and financing partnerships by enabling collaboration among investors and funders, creating risk sharing and co-investing mechanism to support SMEs. Fourth, recognizing the value of small and medium enterprises in the procurement processes, which is missing almost everywhere. And this will broaden the market. And finally, in response to that, we at SEED, Entrepreneurship for Sustainable Development, we will be launching soon a global coalition for innovation, circularity, and entrepreneurship to support the small and medium enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Arab. Very concrete 4 points. I don't need to probably repeat them. You heard them, but the center of focus is what he calls the missing middle gap, which is the small and medium enterprises. I will now go to Arvind Kumar. Arvind, India Water Foundation, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair and colleagues. Human pressures are undermining the biodiversity that underpins all life on land and below water. Ecosystem services delivered by biodiversity, such as crop pollination, water purification, flood protection, and carbon sequestration, are vital to human well-being. Globally, these services are worth an estimated 125 to 140 trillion US dollar per year. That is more than 1.5 times the size of the global GDP. We need to promote policy coherence across different sectors and areas to harness synergies and reduce trade-off for biodiversity, scale up and align finance for biodiversity from all sources, public and private, to fast-track climate funding. Governments around the world should consider a whole of government integrated to climate finance. Governments and institutions globally must go deeper and adopt national strategies that are clearly underline the roles of all the agencies in fighting climate change, integration of climate priorities, and measuring into the public finance management framework to increase accountability for environmental commitments should be considered. Additionally, the integration of climate priorities and impact across the funding pool should be supported. Embedding climate-aware sustainable approaches into the risk management and incentivized by the ensuring that market can obtain and use the data and disclosure that they need to assess risk, while taking advantage and breakthrough technology, investing in at a scale in the zero carbon resilient infrastructure, nature-based solution to just a inevitable transition away from the high carbon development to zero carbon resilient infrastructure, like promoting a green MSME, as well as investing in nature as a solution so that all the economies can grow sustainably. If we talk about India, we is a partner with MSME sector and critical big bone of the Indian economy. At the national level, MSME policies and programs are implemented across ministries and the department. These are all myriad state level initiative and with limited coordination among them. So there is a need of
may I invite
convergence policy program and scale.
May I invite you to please submit your statement in writing as well. There are very good points. So we would like to take them on board. Thank you for raising the issue of policy coherence and whole of the government approach, and probably the whole of society approach in addressing the climate issues and its linkages with the water. So thank you so much for your contributions. May I now invite Leonie Gross from the European Commission to please take the floor.
Thank you. My name is Leonie Gross. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states. And I can only agree with much what my pre-speakers already said. We indeed believe that we should promote alignment of climate and biodiversity finance, as well as the finance of other environmental dimensions through innovative financing models, as well as fiscal and subsidies reforms to foster synergies and achieve greater impact, as others already suggested as well. Further, we need to examine how to shift fiscal systems away from supporting activities that harm the environment, including phasing out environmentally harmful subsidies and divesting from fossil fuels and from measures that spur all kinds of deforestation, towards supporting sustainable solutions and the creation of green jobs. We also need to engage private sector and private finance in sustainable finance, and to examine how measures with economic impacts on the, how to measure economic impacts on the environment and financial risks related, and further, how to account on natural capital. And in the end, of course, to see how to create synergies between all these points. And then if I can use the remainder of my time to make a small statement on the multilateralism part, we would here like to stress the need to focus on areas where existing intergovernmental processes such as MEAs or any other international commitment do not provide for strong governance and mainstreaming follow-up mechanisms. And we see here particularly the natural resource governance and sustainable consumption and production as areas where we should focus mostly. Thank you.
What a timing, exactly on the dot. Thank you so much for that. So yes, so alignment of all environmental finance, including climate and biodiversity, and another message being reinforced, which we already heard, and also the role of the private sector and the private finance. I would like to again ask if there are any member states who would like to take the floor. They can raise their hands now, and we will come back to you for the floor. Thank you so much. In the meantime, I will invite Ibone Holland from IIED to share how we can sharpen our messages on financing.
Thank you very much, Chair, and everyone for the opportunity to speak on this important topic. My name is Ebony Holland. I'm the Nature Climate Policy Lead at the International Institute for Environment and Development. And as speakers have said before, I really agree with many of the points that have already been raised, so I won't repeat those. A point I do want to make, though, is that as well as accelerating the mobilization of finance and bridging that finance gap that Miranda so critically highlighted earlier, we also need to pay attention to ensuring the quality of that finance and ensuring that it's accessible by those who need it the most. And so looking at finance from the perspective of quantity, quality, and access is really essential for ensuring that finance can flow to support sustainable development outcomes. And adding to that, and a point that we look at a lot in our institute is the importance of ensuring that finance and decision-making is delivered at a local level to get behind the priorities and solutions of Indigenous peoples and local communities and other actors at the local level. So in this regard, I have a series of recommendations that I'll draw on, that I will put forward here, that draw on a number of years of research that Sweden and others have supported us to develop. The first is that we really need to strengthen investments in national and local institutions. This is getting to that point around the missing middle referred to earlier, including building national aggregate platforms that can scale up support for finance at the local level. It's quite similar to what Rwanda is doing through their Green Fund at the moment. Second point I'll make is putting an emphasis on equitable governance arrangements and mechanisms that deliver downward accountability as well as upward accountability, but really bringing in accountability at the local level as well. We need to improve the transparency and accountability of nature and climate finance data, all issues that have been raised before, but very critically important. And this is particularly important to build trust in the finance system, a point that Ranika raised earlier also. We need to simplify accreditation and application processes to ensure better access to nature and climate finance. There's no point raising all of this finance if it's not accessible by those who need it the most. We also need to shift towards the provision of patient, predictable and long-term finance, looking at 7 to 10 plus years of funding support, much more than the 3 to 5 years of support that's usually available at the moment. And finally, a point that has also been raised, and I'll reiterate again, we really need to ensure climate change, nature and development are linked in the delivery of the finance to really maximize those co-benefits and also enable locally led action. I'll stop there. Thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I will just pick your first three things: quality, quantity, and access as the foundational work that needs to happen. And then accountability and transparency are the other two ideas, which are again resonating on how to accelerate finance. May I now invite Parisha Kumar, Children and Youth Major Groups to UNEP. Parisha. If Parisha is not here, may I invite Zahra Abu Taha, Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. if Zara is not here, may I now invite Dr. Santosh Kumar to please take the floor. Okay, it seems that some of the colleagues are probably having a problem or maybe not able to unmute themselves. But anyway, we will try to come back. I will request the GGK technical team to see if these colleagues are here and they would still like to take the floor. In a way, so we had a good discussion and we heard a lot of ideas about how to accelerate mobilization of finance and what are the key elements of it. I think we heard it from the co-chairs in the very beginning that these are the few ideas, but then we heard many more ideas. I will probably not summarize them, all of them, but there are a few things which are definitely coming out more clearly than the other ideas. So definitely there is a gap in funding, number one. Number two, there are multiple ways of filling the gap, both from public and private finance. Number three, all the means of financing the environment on climate, biodiversity, and probably the transition should be combined and merged. Number three, there was again the idea of common and differentiated responsibilities. There is the idea of filling the policy gap because only money will not fill the policy and capacity gaps that currently exist, which are necessary for ensuring not only the quantity of finance, but the quality of finance and the impact it can create. So before closing this round, I would like to again check if there are colleagues who would like to take the floor. Is Mr. Santosh Kumar, Dr. Santosh Kumar, are you online?
Yeah, this is Dr. Santosh online.
Please, you have the floor. And we can see and hear you.
Very good afternoon, sir. Just I want to mention some of the several points here in the UNEP. Live along with Mother Nature can reduce the burden of climate change. And Mother Nature, there is a sky, earth, water, fire, and air is entirely different. Science is entirely different.
Dr. Kumar, I am having difficulty in understanding your audio. Is it only me? Could you either move closer to the mic or try to see if the quality of audio could be improved?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to mention different points. Live along with Mother Nature and reduces the burden of climate finance. And Mother Nature, the sky, earth, water, fire, and air is entirely different. And science is entirely different. Conservation should be given to find solutions for global problems through Mother Nature and science. Mother Nature-oriented science is good for the planet, and humanity is expecting an answer that how 2 molecules of hydrogen is the gas, and 1 molecule of oxygen is also gas to form liquid water. And United Nations and UNEP can consider to focus on global issues such as pandemic, COVID-19, and to find out the solutions through the science and also from Mother Nature. And the next point, all the Mother Goddess, the entire world represents the Mother Nature, and so UN can consider the worship places as ancient places of faith. Respect, pray, and live along with Mother Nature. That shows a peaceful and healthy and bright future for all the living beings and humanity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We will definitely consider your inputs. This discussion is more about finance, but we will see if the financing can support the Mother Nature and its capacity to sustain its children on the planet. So I would like to close the discussion on this round one of which was on accelerating finance. I would like to see if the co-chairs would like to make any remarks before we move to the round two. And I see that Egypt is fine. And I'm checking with Finland if you would like to say a few words.
Just maybe, I think many of the, do you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, many of the concrete issues that have already been raised earlier, I think some of them were mentioned also here. There was something that I liked that maybe we could consider amending our list of key messages is the procurement, the role of procurement in directing the financing into a sustainable direction. So I think that was something that I took from the notes from the interventions that that I think is not yet in our messages. There might be other things as well, but this was something that I sort of noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Annika. And with this, we move now to the second round of the discussion, which is on accelerating governance and institutions. In fact, I was seeing there, as we moved down on the finance side, we were starting to connect already with the governance and institutional part of it. It was referred to as the capacity thing. It was referred to it as the quantity or quality of the finance, and then the access issues. So again, we have a few colleagues who have requested that they would like to take the floors. If there are member states who would like to take the floor, they can raise their hands. But those who have already registered include Anne Osamba, Jose Arieta, Floridia Di Coma, Pierre-Jean Closses, Tadissa Amrai Sihalu, Ahmed Wuda, Muhammad Safiol Alam, Samson Bryant, Antudius Rafael, Thierno Abul Bah, and Rafal Deep Singh. So please raise your hand and the GGK team will recognize you and invite you to take the floor. But to frame the discussion, may I now invite Finland, please, to frame the discussion on institutional and governance mechanisms.
Thank you so much, Assad. So I already, in my introductory remark, I already referred to this, but let me say it again. So the money does not make the change if the institutions and policies are not fit for purpose. And I think this applies both internationally and nationally. And the other thing is that we cannot achieve integrated goals like the SDGs by sectoral measures only. So we need to reform our governance and institutional structures. And I think we have already identified many important enablers for managing the finances, policies and practices in a smarter way. A growing number of countries have developed integrated governance structures and institutional capacities, for example. And finance ministers have established a global coalition to integrate climate aspects into economic and financial policy, just to mention a few. Globally, we have quite a robust web of intergovernmental processes, including the multilateral environmental agreement, where the synergies and interlinkages between agreements and commitments have been strengthened. But of course, also there are blind spots, and I would recognize, for instance, sustainable consumption and production, which lacks such global supportive framework, and yet SCP is crucial to combat in combating, for instance, climate change and biodiversity loss. But the questions that have been provided for your consideration are great in my view. And let me just repeat them, because I think that it would be great to get some concrete examples or proposals when it comes to the questions under this round. So what concrete actions and governance mechanisms are needed to leverage the opportunities offered by digital technologies and mitigate possible risks to accelerate progress towards SDGs that leaves no one behind? So what are the concrete actions and governance mechanisms? What concrete actions are needed to transform governance and institutional capacity and models and guarantee intergenerational equity, policy coherence, and rights-based approach in an accelerated implementation of the SDGs? So I think that with these two questions, we can start the discussion, and looking forward to, again, very concrete implementable ideas to add on our list of key messages and recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annika. So So we want more concrete recommendations that can come out from the Stockholm Plus 50. And now we are talking mainly about the institutional and governance mechanisms that are needed. We heard a few ideas in the finance where, I think it was Indonesia, which made it very clear that the climate should be part of the national development planning, or there was a lot of messages on policy coherence. Here, one particular area that we are raising, and which Anika has also mentioned, is the digital technologies. The world is becoming increasingly more and more digital. How we can use, what are the concrete actions in terms of governance and institutions which are needed to make this digital transformation also work for SDGs, for the environmental agenda and sustainability. May I now invite Anne Osamba, please, to take the floor. Anne, are you there? If not, may we move to Jose Arieta, Social Good Peru. Jose, if you're not there, or we can come back to you, can we move to Floridia Di Coma, please?
Yes, thank you, chairs. I'm Florida Di Ciommo, a gender and environmental advocate from Spain, Cambiamo NGO, involved in UNFCCC constituency. And we speak to you today from our hearts. Here today, we urge leaders to deliver real action for transformative and gender just solution that embody human rights. Solutions that fails to protect and uphold human rights are false solutions. And what concrete actions and governance mechanisms are needed to leverage the opportunity offered by digital technology? We are shifting and transforming our communities with solutions that demand investment support, scaling up and replication around the world, not for solution of greenwashing, risky technology. But we ask for building up and democratizing participatory tools within the UNFCCC countries, with the engagement of a good proportion of women, disabled, indigenous people from all different socioeconomic stratification, educational levels, and cultural backgrounds. We ask to reflect on policy uptake issues at different levels, engagement and participant selection, methods of deliberation and consensus building, legitimacy and accountability of people versus policymakers and politicians. Currently, the engagement of people in climate participatory tool needs different capabilities, such as reading documents, knowing different languages, and exercising critical thinking. All these required skills are generally developed within a formal tertiary education. We asked for shift climate participatory tool from technical basic deliberation that belong to climate change experts to multi-stakeholders deliberation based on solving the dilemma from a bottom-up, more societal and value-based perspective, democratizing the climate participatory tools and move them from an extraordinary policy event to an ordinary policy event, consolidate the practice of the climate deliberation and reflected on how to take accountability and legitimacy issues that make recommendation more acceptable by policymakers.
Thank you.
Set climate changing from technical question to value-based resolution, considering the trade-offs of the adaptation measure impacts. Therefore, our goal is to accelerate the transformation to climate resilience by enabling, empowering, and engagement strategy. We feminists, disabled, indigenous peoples reject this false solution and stand up in solidarity. People power, climate justice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you can share your statement in writing as well with us. But thank you so much for emphasizing the need for all-inclusive and consensus-based, more democratized processes for climate discussions, and also identifying a few of the barriers which make participation difficult for certain groups of people. Well noted. Thank you so much. So may I now invite Pierre-Jean Clauset. And if Pierre is not there, may I go to Tadise Amira Sahilu?
Yes.
Yes, Tadise.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well and see you very well.
Good. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Taddasa Amarra Sahelu. I'm the co-chair of IPN and executive director of PAN Ethiopia. I would like to make a short intervention on this, and I would like to talk about the accelerating governance and institutions from the chemicals and waste perspective. Chemicals and waste are linked to almost all SDGs, and failing in this means failing to achieve all SDGs. The recommendation I would like to highlight is that to give equal attention to this sector as has been given to other sectors, starting from at UN level, financing capacity building to the SICAM process, to the BRS process, Minamata, and now the plastics issue is coming, so that the governments and the public interest grassroots action actors can have a proper action towards achieving SDGs through responsible management of chemicals and waste. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was very concrete and very sharp. Thanks. Thank you so much. So now we go to Ahmed Uda, Youth Task Force for Stockholm Plus 50. Ahmed, are you there? If not, can we go to Louise Moliman? Louise, are you there?
Absolutely.
Sir.
Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, great. Hi, Annika and all the other people I've met before. I'm really happy to join this discussion on governance. Extremely important because in my experience, environmental policies have always been more popular than environmental governance. And governance is so much more than only leadership and partnership issues. It's also really about getting the whole government machinery and its workforce ready and agile and committed across all the mental silos and institutional silos and so on. And it's also about addressing governance failures. But I will skip the rest. I have two concrete suggestions for integrated in the second and the third messages. The first is UN Ecocide Council endorsed in 2018 the 11 principles of effective governance for sustainable development, prepared by the UN Committee of Experts on Public Administration with UNDESA. And these 11 principles are based on the 3 headline principles of SDG 16, effectiveness, accountability, and inclusiveness. And a growing number of countries, especially in Africa, is using the principles now to assess and design their sustainability governance. UNDP has integrated them recently in its new strategic plan, and I would propose integrating and promoting the use of the SEPA principles also in the second message of this paper. My second proposal is UNEP has developed as custodian of the indicator for SDG 1714 on policy coherence for sustainable development, a set of 8 sub-indicators that together cover most of the SDG governance challenges. OECD has elaborated this into principles, and there's guidance and a good practice. Some countries have started making action plans on PCSD, policy coherence for sustainable development, and I think this is a very concrete way to improve governance capacity, and I hope that more countries will join, and this could be added to the recommendation. And I have now 4 or 5 seconds left. Thank you.
You saved 4 seconds for us. Thank you so much, Luis. And thank you for inviting attention to the ECOSOC's 11 principles. I think that's already an agreed framework in which we can look at environmental governance and go beyond environmental policies. And this is something, you know, as Paige, is very close to my heart, that we need the governance mechanism which help to address the economic challenges of unemployment, inequality, and stagnated economic growth together with the triple planetary crisis. And that is only possible in a governance framework. So thank you so much for raising this again. I'm sure that this will find its place in the outcome documents of this report. May I now invite Simon Olsen? If you are Simon, are you here?
Yes, I'm there.
See you. Yes.
I'm audible and visible. Great.
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. Let me be very brief and just make one recommendation. It's something that we can take, that you should take to Stockholm. Listen, the countries that always seem to perform the best on the SDGs, every year we have the International SDGs Index. Those are usually the Nordic countries. If you look at, if you look at the relationship between SDG performance and spillovers, there is a relationship. So the better the country performs, the larger international spillovers does it have. And those are often negative effects. That means negative environmental and social externalities are somewhere else, but not in the country that consumes it. That's a problem that I think some countries, the developed countries in Stockholm should step up and say, we will address this in the future. We will make a commitment to address this, because otherwise no country can be proud of their SDG performance, and no country is meeting the SDGs, as we know. So please consider taking this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. A very important point. So SDGs and spillover effects. I'm sure that this will make it, because one of our co-chairs is from the Nordic countries. So I will invite Anika towards the end that we make sure that, yes, we take it forward. Now, may I invite the Rahul Deep Singh from Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research. Rahul, are you here? In case not, then can we move to Muhammad Safiol Alam, Youth Foundation of Bangladesh? Or do we have other member states? Again, I would like to see if there are any member states who would like to take the floor. Yes, I see one hand, which is Antiduous Raphael. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. And I guess am I well audible, right?
Yes, you are, and visible.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for this. Thank you for this great opportunity. I'm Antiduous Raphael. I'm presenting from Germany, but I'm a Tanzanian by origin. And I'm also part of the Stockholm +50 Youth Task Force. So my intervention will be based on the transformation between the two. The first one, I'll insist on the need for meaningful integration. When I say integration, I mean a meaningful both vertical and horizontal integration among the stakeholders from the community level. When I say the vertical integration, I mean from the grassroots, from the community level, from the young generation, because they are the ones that are believing the sustainability agenda to the national and the global level. We need to be seeing like a kind of a meaningful integration. But how can it be? We need also to transform from monitoring and reporting to action, because we are talking about bringing commitment to action. So we need us to be moving from monitoring and reporting side to action. We have been monitoring the carbon, the carbon emission levels and reporting what the levels as far as gone, but we need to move from the reporting and monitoring area to action. What we are seeing, the climate levels, the emission level has been increasing. We need to move to strict action to mitigate and reduce the emission. But how can it be achieved? We need to empower and deal with the young generation and the local communities, because they are the ones that are acting on the sites. So if we do some intervention that will be focusing on the youth and young generation from the grassroots, we can make, we can attain like a meaningful intervention and transformation to add the Rosso Biodiversity, to tackle the pollution in most of the things like the water and air pollution that they don't have political and administration jurisdiction, but also will be addressing the incidence of climate change through meaningful intervention in climate change mitigation and adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raphael. And thank you for raising the issue of meaningful integration once again, and transforming or moving from monitoring and reporting to real action. I think that's what the Stockholm +50 really wants to focus on, that we move to action. And that's why we are sharpening our ideas and recommendations and key messages together with you, that how the world can move to take action. Thank you so much. May I now give the floor to Camilla, Parents for Future Global Community. Camilla, are you with us? Maybe Camilla is still joining. She requested the floor, but we will probably come back. Now, with these, we have come to the end of those who had requested to take the floor.
Excuse me, can you hear me at the moment?
Yes, I can, Camilla.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Now you have muted yourself.
Thank you.
Now you are unmuted. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for having this opportunity. And I'm here connecting from Poland, but I would like to say a few words from our parents, global communities, from Global South and Global North, especially now when we totally lost trust to our policymakers, and all of the solutions that you are talking about and that wonderful independent experts on sustainable development already put on the table are there in all our countries. The problem is, as we see and want to raise the issue, is that as long as the business related with the fossil fuel is so much influencing the decision on our policymakers, these solutions are either greenwashed or are not really taken seriously into consideration or slowing down. The process is very slow. So that's why we would really like to raise the issue in Stockholm to create the mechanisms, the UN mechanisms of forcing our authorities to really follow what's needed regarding Paris Agreement. And another issue is to take a closer look on the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which three pillars are actually the basis for us to move forward for all of us and all the issues that we are talking about on. So thank you very much for the space.
Thank you, Camilla. Thank you so much for coming in. If there are other colleagues or audience who would like either to take the floor or would like to raise questions, there is a Q&A function, but also there is a raise hand function. But I think we had a good discussion. So there are a few key things that I could recollect, and then I will see if if the co-chairs would like to contribute to the conclusions. I think one thing that is coming out very clearly, we heard the message on more participation and possibly all-inclusive consensus-based participation in terms of governance and institutional capacity building and contributions to the climate debate. We heard about coherence between different multilateral environmental agreements, especially that relate to chemicals waste, and now the plastic has come in, and the need for a joint global coherence or more coordinated global coherence around those ideas. We heard about moving from environmental policy to environmental governance, and we were reminded of the 11 principles for sustainable development governance that Ecocide has approved. We heard about SDGs and its spillover effects on the rest of the world, and how do we need concrete recommendations on how to tackle those issues, as well as on meaningful integration between different parts of the environmental agenda, as well as moving from monitoring and reporting to actions. So we have quite a broad set of ideas that we are looking at now. One thing which I would like again to request to the participants, if you can come up, we haven't heard much about digital governance and digital technologies, and what are the main recommendations from you in terms of institutional and governance to make digital technologies work for sustainable development. So please, if you have ideas, you can send it to us in writing, in chat, and in Q&A. I see that Saad Ukas has requested the floor. So Saad, if you are with us, would you like to make a contribution now? Or Marcel Dorsch? Or Pela Thiel?
May I? Saad here?
Yes, Saad, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So as the representative of the African Youth Initiative for Climate Change and also the Youth Task Force, I would like to shed the light about the importance of education. If we want to reach the true intergenerational equity, we should talk about intercultural equity, and the only way to achieve that is through education. We need global education to be implemented to promote citizen education, intercultural acceptance, and SDGs education within the young generation. Also call in for more South-South, North-South, and regional collaborations based on sharing of good practices, capacity sharing, and institutional empowerment to decolonize digital use within different countries. And finally, calling for institutionalizing the involvement of young generation as well as local community representatives and working together with them to ensure their unity and representativeness and have accountability mechanisms for their representativeness to ensure inclusiveness and fairness of their involvement, and that those who are marginalized are the ones getting the space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saad. That was very concrete and sharp. I will now invite and I will read the list of colleagues who have requested floor. So Marcel Dorsch, you have requested the floor. If you can raise your hand. Pela Thiel, Claire, Carlinia, Edlow, and Ahmed Huda. So I will go to Marcel if you are there. I can see you actually.
I'm here, yeah. Do you hear me well? Thanks for the opportunity to quickly jump in. I wasn't part of the last working group round, and I think the document is already very interesting, and I'm very much interested in the third issue you raised, the digital transformation, but I was surprised to not see according messages in the document yet. And I want to make a quick contribution here. I work at the German Environmental Agency, and I'm also a co-champion, or we as an institution are co-champion of the CODES network, the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability. And we actually will present an action plan at Stockholm Plus 50 exactly on the topic of creating, enabling, and sustainable planet in the digital age. And I think for Stockholm Plus 50 document, it's very essential to highlight this key area of aligning the two big transformations we have to face, the digital transformation and the sustainability transformation. And we have some key issues we think you might need to address. I mean, you have already some good text in the issue section. I think it's important to state that we are not yet on track. We need to actively shape these digital transformations as a world community to build sustainable futures actively. And we highlight three shifts we need. First, enabling the alignment of digital change with our sustainable development goals. Second, mitigating all the negative effects of digital infrastructures and change to make digitalization itself sustainable regarding energy consumption, material waste, but also digital divides and rights violations. So all very important topics. And third, accelerating digital innovations for our existing sustainability goals. We also have many proposals for institutional and governance changes we really need to prepare and align in our institutions, in the UN system, in the national bodies and ministries and bureaucracies, in the research communities, to really align these two challenges, main challenges of our century.
Thank you, Marcel. And thank you so much for sharing the work of CODES. We have been hearing about it from David as well. It's great to have you here and your three ideas. I believe, so the colleagues from GGKP has already shared some of the ongoing work, but it will be great if you can share the document with the Secretariat as well, and especially if you can summarize into three main recommendations on policy and governance. May I now invite Pela Thiel. I see you on the screen, Pela.
Thank you very much, Pela Thiel from Ecocide Sweden. And I very much appreciate this dialogue and especially the focus on concrete recommendations and solutions. So one cross-cutting solution to fill the policy gap and driving implementation through a whole of society approach, of course, is to recognize ecocide as a crime at the International Criminal Court. Criminalizing the most severe harms to the environment will support the implementation of all of the solutions that we have discussed here. It will not solve everything, but it will support by creating a global legal safety rail, which is currently conspicuously absent. A crime of ecocide will create international accountability for the most powerful decision makers and create a legal base for environmental multilateralism. The definition of ecocide, launched last year by Stop Ecocide International, will be a lens to ensure policy coherence. And the definition is that ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. This will directly affect business and policy decisions. Ecocidal activities should not be profitable, they should be illegal. And this will shift finances away from the most harmful practices, which are currently being heavily financed. And it will level the playing field for sustainable and regenerative solutions, be a powerful tool for environmental justice. And of course, also intergenerational justice and a just transition. This law will protect the lives and livelihoods of current and future generations by protecting the future of all life. So we strongly urge you to include an international crime of ecocide in the Stockholm text. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pilla. Bringing a different and new dimension to the discussion. We are really grateful for your ideas, and they are definitely taken note of. May I now invite Claire? Claire, I think I see a different name on your screen, Lester.
Yeah, thank you very much for the floor. The Environment of Peace report that the Stockholm International Peace and Research Institute will publish on May the 23rd is looking at how climate change and other environmental crises are transforming what it means to build and maintain peace. And we fully support the recommendation in this paper for more policy coherence across sectors. The Environment of Peace report argues that to be successful, transitions to more sustainable societies not only need to be just, but also peaceful. And to achieve this, we need more joined up solutions across policy spheres. Measures to address environmental challenges should promote peace, and measures addressing security issues need to promote environmental integrity. Our research has found that mitigation, adaptation, and conservation policies, if not designed well, can have unintended consequences that can aggravate inequalities, injustices, and create or exacerbate conflict. Environmental policies must be designed and implemented in transparent and inclusive ways. Mitigation and adaptation policies should assess potential knock-on societal effects, especially in fragile regions, and seek to minimize them. Policies should also look to realize co-benefits, seeking environmental solutions which enhance the wider resilience of communities. And we urgently need to scale up and share good practice in this space to know how to do it better. The role of funding, as we've discussed, is key to this. International funding mechanisms that address environmental decline should disperse funds in ways that do not damage security and peace, but enhance them. Finance needs to flow to the most fragile states and communities much more than it does now. And as others have said, access needs to be as inclusive and as focused on the long term as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. May I ask for your institution? I think I missed it in the introduction. We would like to take note of that.
Yeah, we are the Stockholm International Peace and Research Institute, and our project is called the Environment of Peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ahmed, may I give the floor to you, and please introduce your organizations because we don't have them for those who asked for the floor at a later stage.
Okay, actually I can't start my video.
We can hear you very well, Ahmed.
Okay, okay, yes, thank you. First, thank you for giving me the floor. My name is Ahmed Oda. I am from Palestine Youth Task Force of Stockholm +50. Dear member state, dear distinguished delegates, first we urge the member state to commit to expanding education on the supplementary crisis in all school curriculum, while ensuring the free education for all children and marginalization groups, and providing access to the green jobs for all youth. Second, Stockholm +50 must recognize a progress made on the meaningful youth engagement. Youth have a seat in the UN Youth Strategy and Variance Interagency Network. And the last year, the UN Environment Management Group welcomed us. However, while today youth are the most connected, the most knowledgeable, and the largest generation ever, we still face a scientific marginalization. We call for immediate scaling up of financing, capacity building, partnership, and youth inclusion as a standing item across all the MIAs. Third, the environmental rule of law is key, providing constitutional guarantees of the right to healthy environment. We call for a criminalization of a large scale environment destruction by including Ecocide in the Rome state of the international criminal law. Thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the interventions. I think I had summarized the one which came before this last group of interventions, but we have heard, it was good to hear about digital transformation and ideas from the codes that can be taken. We heard about a new dimension, which was around criminalizing the environmental harm, the ecocide concept, and lack of the global legal framework around it. We heard about the peace and environment interface and how the policy coherence is also important, that the peace issues are included in environmental policy, and especially the issues that the fragile states are facing. And then we heard the large-scale environmental destruction from Ahmed, that why it's important to look into those issues. So with this, I think we are coming to the end of the second round of discussions. So I don't know if the co-chairs would like to say anything before we move to the third round, which is on renewing multilateralism. So I will check first with Egypt. Would you like to say anything at the conclusion of this round? No, you're fine. Okay. Anika, would you like to say something before we move to the third round?
Yeah, maybe just, express my gratitude that after your urge for receiving more views on the digitalization, I think there was a very rich discussion in the chat. Yes. So maybe we can then just, of course, everything will be taken on board in the final report and all that, but that, I think that was a great thing. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that I think it was very important that we heard sort of the need for having the interface between the environment and peace, between the environment and human rights, not only between the environmental sort of conventions or issues. So I think this is something that also from my earlier experience from the national sustainable development implementation tasks, I've noticed that how difficult it is sometimes to bring together different constituencies, those who are dealing with human rights issues with those who are mainly, working with the environment. And I think this would be very, very, very important when we are talking about the SDGs and the implementation of the 2030 agenda in a coherent manner. And I think that those messages came through very clearly through the interventions today. And happy about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anika, definitely. And now we move to the third round, which is around renewing multilateralism. And for the first two rounds, you have seen that there is a narrative developing, that yes, there was a discussion on finance, the need for quality, quantity, etc. The second round basically saying that just finance is not enough. We need to have the enabling environment. We need to make the national policies and capacities to ensure that the finance delivers what it is aimed for. And now we are coming to the multilateralism, but also I think there is a part in the background paper which looks at the partnership side of it and how do we work together, both at the global level, but at all levels. If there are member states who would like to take the floor, please raise your hands and GGKP colleagues will recognize you. For the moment, we have a few colleagues who have already requested floor. We have Rebecca from Austrian National University. We have Neha from Mobart Co-op BOD Society. We have Jin Tanaka, Stockholm +50 Youth Task Force. We have Jan from NGO Committee on Development from Geneva. We have Umar Adamu from the Center for Muslim Youth in Peace and Development. We have Mamdou Mustafa from World Youth Parliament for Water. We have Tanvi Mishra, UNGO or UN NGO. And we have Arun Kanti from Climate Hero Initiatives. So before I invite you to make your interventions, please prepare yourself. The GGKP team will be recognizing you soon. But I would like to invite the co-chair, probably Egypt this time, to frame the discussion on renewing multilateralism and working together. So Mirande, the floor and screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Assad. Been very, very enriching and enlightenment discussion. And I feel that talking now about multilateralism, we're already doing it. So I feel that already it's all the three tracks are interlinked and related. But let's try to focus a little bit on specific items that will help enrich more the discussion. When we're talking about international cooperation, it's a must. And considering that developing countries had limited ability to mobilize enough finance and to work alone. We need all the support and the cooperation to help move forward. The broad-based partnership are needed to support these countries for designing and implementing integrated policy and enable them to address environmental and economic crises together. We need to strengthen the multilateral commitment to address the planetary crisis, not only climate change, and we mentioned it, the climate change, biodiversity, desertification also, in a manner that ensures developing countries are not disadvantaged in their need to develop. Instead, we should focus on climate resilient economies, protect biodiversity, while allowing developing countries to develop. No country cannot do it alone. The need for collective action and honoring pledge had to be made collectively. The crisis situation required the advanced countries exert their full effort to help those in most in dire need. To try to shape it and sharp it a little bit, I'll try to throw two main questions that we want to hear. What concrete action can be proposed to renew the multilateralism and solidarity to accelerate the means of implementation? What concrete action can deliver deeper policy coherence to support countries for designing and implementing their policy and enable them to address the challenge that we're living in all face? Thank you. I think back to you, Assad.
Thank you, Mirande. And colleagues and participants, you have heard, once again, the focus is on concrete actions. So let's see what we can suggest to the co-chairs. So may we start with Rebecca, if you are online with us, Rebecca? Yes, I can see you, please.
Great, thank you very much for the floor. My name is Rebecca Burns, and in addition to my role with the Australian National University, I'm also the Deputy Director of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. So fossil fuels undermine all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. We know they're a key driver of the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the plastics and pollution crisis, as well as a key driver of conflict, which we've heard a little bit about on the call today. And the inadequacy of global governance on fossil fuels really undermines efforts to address all of the environmental issues that we're chatting about today. Currently, there's no global registry or transparency mechanism that allows us to even know what fossil fuels are being dug out of the ground by countries. There's no forum at the international level for countries to make commitments for equitably phasing down their fossil fuels in line with recommendations that have been made by the IPCC, the International Energy Agency, and UNEP. And there's also no mechanism to accelerate the finance that's needed to help fossil fuel dependent countries diversify their economies away from fossil fuels, scale up renewable energy, and also design a just transition for workers. So given all this, it's concerning to see that fossil fuels haven't been mentioned so far particularly strongly within this process or mentioned in the Leadership 3 briefing note. But we do see Stockholm Plus 50 as a really important opportunity to take leadership of this issue and to demonstrate the possibilities of multilateralism. So in terms of concrete outcomes to suggest from this process, we ask that a key outcome from Stockholm Plus 50 would be a recommendation for a new global governance framework that would be situated within the UN system, that would focus particularly on the phasing out of fossil fuel production in an equitable manner and the scaling up of finance that's needed to support fossil fuel dependent developing countries, which would both complement and implement the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Agenda. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was very concrete, I would say. So we want a global framework under UN on phasing out fossil fuel, as well as financing the transition. Thank you. Now I come to Jean Tanaka, please.
Okay, can you see me and can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thanks so much. Okay, so I'm going to start it. So dear chairs, member states, and the distinguished participants, thank you for let me take a floor. This is Jean Tanaka. I'm from Japan. I'm the member of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. I'm convinced that some process will be contribute significantly to establishment of the economic framework of the reconstruction process based on the multilateralist linkage. However, using countries classified as SIDS or ALCO are left out of these opportunities and a risk of the being left out of the integrated economic spheres and reconstruction process. In addition, many youth are unable to present their views on global governance and are not equipped to react to the benefits to effective participants and collective actions and cooperations. So I'm convinced that we need to consider the legitimacy of effectiveness with regard to the multilateral linkage today. At first, we need to promote the effective multilateralism in the exchange of technology, of the presentation of views, and the expansion of the frameworks through multilateral partnerships. The major problem is the numbers and quality in the frameworks. That's the kind cited as NATO's move against the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the strong situations and some of the discussion of the GATT and the Kyoto protocols. And second, in order to multiple sovereign status in the international committee to advance discuss within the United Framework, it's necessary to ensure the universality of the issues and the legitimacy of their efforts. And agreement as a Paris Agreement, which is all member states can agree to as the most legitimate for the universal agreements that can be reached to the every persons. And today's world is political norms and economic principles and the framework based on the partnership, we can continue and contribute to the work connections for the solving SDGs and covering to the all sectors. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for your statement and referring to the transfer of technologies issues as well as on GATT and Kyoto Protocol issues, which are definitely important. Thank you so much. May I now give the floor to John Lone, NGO Committee on Development. John, are you with us?
Yes, I am here. And I speak on behalf of the NGO Committee on Development in Geneva, which includes NGOs that were active already at the 1972 Stockholm Conference. The 1972 conference became a landmark UN conference because it made it clear that the environment cannot be saved without development for all. The background paper that has been produced here has been greatly improved, and we welcome this, especially that it gives recognition to the core normative principles that we need to keep in mind and that the public also needs to know, that of common and differentiated responsibilities, that of the right to development, and the question of reducing inequalities between and among countries. So this is very important. It's also important, the concept of renewing multilateralism, which needs to be strengthened. And here we have also the important normative issue of the UN Charter, which stipulates that the United Nations is at the center of global economic cooperation. And that needs to be further strengthened. And the UN budget itself needs to be strengthened. We appreciate that it talks about massively scaling up and mobilize funding, which is much, much needed and needs to be radically increased. And here we need a public mobilization for this to happen, a worldwide public mobilization. Perhaps a global UN World Conference on this matter could be an important way to mobilize the political will among governments, but also among peoples who live in countries who are rather in a declining mood to provide public assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, thank you so much for your appreciation that the paper has improved the background document. That's a co-creation of all the participants who have so far participated in all the informal working groups and the preparatory meetings. So we are happy to note that you found the improvements in there, and credit goes to everyone who has contributed their ideas as you are doing today. Also, thank you for raising the issue that yes, for the strengthened multilateralism, the UN budget needs to improve, and possibly there is a need for more global action around it for voluntary contributions. Highly appreciated. May I now invite Afsania Hassani from Iran Ministry of Environment, please. The floor is yours. Afsania, are you with us? Yeah, I can see you now. Afsania, you can unmute yourself. I think you are muted. May I request the GGKP team to assist Afsania? Oh, now you are unmuted. In the meantime, may I invite Mamdou Mustafa, please take the floor while the GGK technical team works with Afsane.
Hello.
Yes, Mamdou.
Do you hear me very well? Can you see me?
Very well, very well. We can see and hear you very well. Thank you, Mamdou.
Yeah, I'm Mamadou Mustafa. I am a young of Senegal. I'm from Senegal. I'm a member of World Young Parliament of Water, and I'm very happy to be here and to participate in this session. So, if you ask the question, accelerated the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development with the framework of the decade of action. So here we have two questions. The first question is how to accelerate the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development, and the second is what sharing, what is the characteristic the environmental development of sustainable development. So in the sustainable development we have three parts. The first, economical, social, and the environmental. So in the environmental we have two parts. The first is fight against climate change, and the second is preserve the diversity of species and natural and energy resources. So for the two parts, I will go first because I have only 2 minutes.
Yes.
For the two parts, the first, fight against climate change. If you want to fight against climate change, we must do many things. So I choose somewhere for the time. First one, we reduce the greenhouse gas emission. 2, doing reforestation. 3, we stop the desertification. 4, we use the renewable energy. 5, we encourage people to adopt the ecological gist. We have another adoption, so I take only this. And the second, to preserve the diversity of species and natural and energy resources. First, we fight against poaching in the forest, and we protect underrated space, and we stop the pollution and destruction of their living environment. So it is the small contribution. So we have another. So may I say I take it. No, thank you very much. I'm very happy to participate in this trick, and
Thank
you
you.
understand.
Thank you, Mustafa,
Yeah,
for joining us from Senegal. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And raising all the issues about especially poaching, which didn't come up. We talked about the environmental crimes, but now you have given it a more focus. May I now again try if Afsania Hassani can take the floor? Afsania, are you able to unmute yourself? And in the meantime, can I invite Tanvi Mishra? Tanvi, are you with us?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Then I guess we can start.
Yes, please, Tanvi.
Okay. Thank you for the floor, Chair, Co-Chair, Honorable Member States, and esteemed delegates. My name is Tanvi Mishra. I'm representing Thailand, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. Presently, young people comprise of approximately 50% of the global population, but this number has not been reflected in decision-making capacities in environmental legislation. And one of my biggest recommendations that we need to see is that we need a greater percentage of young people represented at decision-making capacities, as well as scientists, which is another constituent of the human population that has been missing, in my opinion. Another thing we need to address in regards to scaling up collective action is that the availability of opportunities for smallholder farmers and indigenous communities that are the heart of climate protection schemes need to be bolstered. There also needs to be a greater availability of climate information in different languages so that people who don't necessarily confide to the 6 UN languages can also understand and participate in these multilateral processes. And finally, I ask that in terms of sustainable and SDG positive practices, so many people do, that these processes be made more fiscally beneficial for those in the supply chain, especially for the constituents I've mentioned above, such as farmers, indigenous people, and climate defenders. A key aspect of sustainability that I've learned as a biologist is that we have to make earth-friendly practices mutually beneficial for large-scale corporations, governments, as well as the smallholders who are a huge and integral part of these processes. I'd like to thank you all so much for your time, and I'd like to yield the floor back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanvi. I'm always very happy when someone raises the issue of the smallholder farmers. We hear quite a lot about the small and medium enterprises, but smallholder farms, which host most of the poorest and the malnutrition people in the world, are usually not so much highlighted in our discussion. So thank you for raising that issue. I would like to again check if Afsania Hassani from the Iran's Ministry of Environment is able to take the floor. And if still there are technical issues, may I see if Magnus Empfel from WWF is able to take the floor? Yes, Magnus, we can see you.
I am. Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks all for this rich conversation and for the preparation of documents, which are very promising and interesting. And like to just strengthen and reaffirm a lot of the points made in the documentation, the conversation here, by adding suggested recommendation, which sort of combines all the topics we discussed here about redirecting finance, about how to develop the definition and the monitoring of progress and economic development beyond GDP, and the accounting for that to include nature as sort of the foundation for economic and societal development, and also the discussion here about reforming policies and the institutions driving them. So what we are working with from WWF together with partner organizations, including UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center and others, is to prepare a proposal to for the Stockholm Plus 50 to recommend the establishment of what we have defined as a nature positive economy roadmap. We as an organization stand behind the definition of a nature positive outcome by 2030. And this this initiative is to address the economics of that, how to, for instance, to mobilize more finance, we need to shift the framework for economies, basically, including all of these measures which have been discussed here. And that's what we're calling for and proposing for all these very valuable assessments and proposals which are discussed here and are being worked out from various organizations to be combined together into an actionable roadmap, which will be co-created and developed with equitable development in mind, and which will be something for governments to be able to commit to and be guided by for implementation. And that as part of the recommendations, there should be some sort of body, a commission or something similar to that, which is mandated to develop this roadmap for governments subsequently to commit to and to guide the global implementation of this architecture that we need to, in a similar way as we're now discussing net zero for climate, also discuss and combine that with nature positive for nature as a prerequisite for economic societal development. So we will present this at the Stockholm +50 at the side event, and we're hoping that this could be also reflected in the recommendations from this working group and in the leadership dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you for sharing the information about the nature positive economy roadmaps. Sounds like a very good idea. So we are coming to the end of those speakers who had requested to take the floor. I think we had again a very rich discussion, which will be definitely very helpful for further improving the background paper, but also the key messages that will go into the recommendations from the Stockholm +50. So the few things that stayed in my mind, and I may have missed many of those because it was a rich discussion, but a global governance framework for phasing out of fossil fuels and financing the transition was one recommendation that came out very clearly. There was Jin from the youth raised the idea of promoting effective multilateralism, including technology transfer and partnerships, and looking at GATT and Kyoto Protocol agreements that have been there. John raised the idea of number one, improving the multilateralism, but also then he mentioned the role of UN in this and better support for the UN and how it can be strengthened. There were also issues of, Mamdouh raised a number of issues, including poaching and the criminal activities that are taking place in different parts of the world. And Tanvi talked about the smallholder farmer issues, among many other issues that she raised, but they were already discussed. And then going beyond GDP and nature positive economy roadmaps. So I think we have quite a few concrete ideas, and we heard that many of these things will be presented in the Stockholm +50, including this idea of nature positive economy roadmaps. So with this, we are coming to almost the conclusion of the third round. But before closing, I would like to invite Mustafa from Egypt, if he would like to say a few words on governance and multilateralism. Mustafa, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you very much, Assad. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And once again, I apologize for not having my video feed. I don't have a camera at hand, as you know. Yeah. As a matter of fact, it's not just about multilateralism and governance. It's a brief wrap up of the ideas we heard. We will do a sort of a combined wrap up. I'll say a few remarks and move over to Miran to wrap everything up. I have to commend this session, this working group. We heard very good ideas, very fruitful conversation, I would say. Out of the ideas we heard, I think there are some that we really need to take to the key messages. One of them is how can we consolidate and combine finances to address the concerns of the development concerns of developing states. The idea raised by Indonesia at the start of round one of finance. One of the most important ideas I heard during the governance sessions were the importance of incorporating the Ecocide 11 principles of governance into the key messages. I think this is a must, and the key messages of LD3 must include these. The issue of SDGs fulfillment and spillovers. I think again, this is one of the most important ideas raised today, as all actions, even if they are towards a more sustainable future, to more green future, all actions of every state has an effect, be it positive or negative, on all other states. And the issue of spillovers must be taken into consideration. We heard comments on the necessity of the universality of participation, to incorporate various and different groups, age groups, gender groups, and so on and so forth. I think everybody and every government agrees today that empowerment and universal participation is of prime importance. And I think all governments are working towards some aspect of empowerment and universal participation. What I did not hear, and what I would have liked to hear, is where are we succeeding, and where are we falling short, and what are the ideas or proposals, I might say, to amend these shortfalls. I would say I did not hear concrete proposals on what we need to do to better universal participation and empowerment. And I would like to take that message to LD3, to Informal Working Group 3, that maybe we need to hear some proposals on that issue. Everybody knows there is a need. Everybody knows governments all over the world are working to achieve that. We need to know if we're doing it right, and where are we falling short. On multilateralism, the message is clear. Nobody can do it alone. We all need to join hands and efforts to achieve the goals. We need, be it environmental, developmental, in all the goals. And I think the issue of multilateralism is somehow the cocoon that holds everything else. Multilateral action will enhance finance, will enhance governance, will enhance participation, and would definitely lead us towards the final goals of us. This is my brief note, and if you allow me, and if I may, I hand over to Miran to wrap everything up. Thank you very much. And again, my comments and my commendations for a very, very successful, very, very I say important and informative working group. Thank you very much, Asad.
Thank you, Mustafa. Mustafa is the part of the co-chair from Egypt, and now over to Miran.
Thank you, Asad. And I would like to echo what Mustafa was saying, and I commend all this great work, great group and collective work and action together. And let me try to wrap up at least what was mentioned on the finance, and what action were needed for accelerating the mobilization of finance. I think we all agree that meeting ambition targets requires scaling up financing from all sources. And to meet the financing needs of most developing countries will not be enough. And this is why we need to strengthen the domestic public finance capacity, and this should be a priority. Capacity building also is needed to enhance domestic resource mobilization. To be more efficient, We need to assess quality of spending, not to waste resources. Capacity building is needed to assess the future risk beyond climate and create a more resilient and financial system. Fiscal transparency is needed for public procurement, which can be a big driver of financing. We need to respect the principle of CBDR and deliver on financing and technology transfer commitment to rebuild the trust and solidarity to underpin necessary global action and leave no one behind. We need to focus on climate and biodiversity finance through innovative financial model and fiscal and subsidy reforms. It's also key to engage the private sector and private finance for sustainable finance. For this, we need to work on how to measure economic impacts on the environmental and financial risk, and to see how to create synergies between the 3 points. We all agree that private sector has a crucial role to play, but it's also important not to focus only on large corporations, but there is a role to play for the MSMEs and acknowledge their importance to local innovation and jobs. We heard about not only the quantity of finance, but the quality and access to it are also important to support the Sustainable Development Goals. We should strengthen the investment in national and local capacity and finance market, putting an emphasis on accountability and transparency is also crucial to have a concrete action. This is what we heard from the finance, and I think we need to take this over for our the third actually informal working group that will help actually consolidate our message that we have to take it back to Stockholm in June. I'll stop here and I'll give the floor to Annika to maybe bring, give the rest of the wrap up for the second round. Thank you.
Thank you. So Annika, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Miranda, and thank you, Assad, for conducting this meeting together with me. So, and thank you everyone for your great interventions, and I enjoyed very much the rich discussion, and I noticed that you took our urge to be concrete very seriously, and we heard many good recommendations and concrete action points that we can definitely add on in our next version of the key messages paper that we will then have in front of us during the third and the last informal working group meeting. But for the round 2, accelerating governance and institutional reform, there are some points that maybe as a wrap up I could raise here. So we need to uphold human rights and focus on what is needed to leverage opportunities from digital technologies. And to this end, democratizing participatory tools and engaging good proportions of women, indigenous people, persons with disabilities, older persons. I think there was a very nice discussion on not only about the importance of engaging the youth, but also the older persons. And people across all income groups and educational backgrounds. So to really engage everybody is very important. Chemicals and waste have a strong link to all SDGs and need to be managed responsibly if we are to achieve the 2030 agenda. And we many times refer to the interface between the climate change and biodiversity, but I think, and also on the basis of the discussion that we heard today, that we need to amend it by the word pollution. That has also been recognized by UNEP and others that we have the triple planetary crisis, and of course the management of chemicals and waste and plastics, of course, is important part of that. and also the recognition of a clean, safe, sustainable environment as a human right is also, I think, very important to emphasize here. The United Nations governance principles for SDGs, which focus on effectiveness, accountability, and governance, should be integrated in the key messages for this leadership dialogue. I think many participants referred to those, and thank you, Louis, for raising those and reminding us of those principles that maybe we have already sort of forgotten. Very, very pertinent, very relevant set of principles in our leadership dialogue. And many countries are already using these principles, and we can help to bring more attention to them through Stockholm Plus 50. It was also raised that better performing countries on SDG indicators, so the SDG when we look at the SDG index, they nevertheless have often negative spillovers in other countries by offshoring dirtier activities. And we need to readdress this by scaling up support for the Global South and also integrating spillover analysis in measuring SDGs performance. And I think this is also something that the richer countries, including mine, is trying to do, but it's not easy. But I think this is definitely something that we should raise in our leadership dialogue and in our recommendations. I think this was a very good point that was made. It was also recognized that trust is somehow broken, and we need meaningful integration of stakeholders from grassroots and youth to make global processes credible and relevant for all. And of course, the trust between the governments and private sector and civil society and between North and South is crucial to accelerate the implementation. Very important, I think, interesting was the notion that intercultural equity is as important as a concept as intergenerational equity. And scaled up access to quality education is the way to achieve both. I think very important recommendation. And to ensure sustainable digital transformation, 3 shifts are needed at least. Enabling alignment of digital shifts with SDGs, mitigating negative shifts of digitalization, for instance, for environment, human rights, and thirdly, scaling up digital innovation and access to digital technology. And then it was also noted that UNEP's work on policy coherence for sustainable development for SDGs and the sub-indicators created for this process, which have been actually further developed into actionable principles by the OECD, could also be mentioned in our recommendations, and also those could be of use for many that maybe don't know these indicators that exist. Because policy coherence is also something that is very difficult to measure actually. If we get any help from UNEP or other institutions, I think that would be very helpful. So those would be my points for round 2.
Thank you so much, Annika and Miranda and Mustafa for summarizing it so well. It was a very rich discussion. So we are grateful for your co-chairship person. Would you like to add anything else before I go to Jerzy as co-host of the Stockholm Plus 50 for his concluding remarks? So anything from Annika, you or Miranda? Yes, please.
Yeah, I think I could do the 3rd round also here.
Okay.
Even though I think it is still in our memory quite freshly because it was the last round, but something from that as well. So it was mentioned that fossil fuels undermine all SDGs and they are a key driver of the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, plastics crisis, and even a site for a conflict. And currently there is no transparency mechanism regarding what fuels are being dug out and where, and there is no forum to discuss the equitable phasing down of fossil fuels. And it was proposed even to have a kind of a global framework for that purpose. We need to address two questions: how to accelerate implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development, and what is the characteristic of environmental dimension of sustainable development. So there are maybe two different sides of that. A fossil fuels non-proliferation treaty situated within the UN to complement the UNFCCC is needed. And so Stockholm Plus 50 is a key event which can mark a turning point. And indeed, I already mentioned, we would also need a global financing mechanism to help fossil fuel dependent countries on both consumption and production fronts effect just and equitable transition towards cleaner sources. We need to promote effective multilateralism, better access and involvement of youth, evidence-based and agile governance, and strong partnerships that can take global issues to a local level and empower communities to take effective action. And to fulfill ambitions of 1972, we need to ensure development for all, reducing inequalities, and uphold common but differentiated responsibilities. The United Nations needs to be at center of this development, and stronger funding for the UN needs to be provided. It was mentioned that smallholder farmers and indigenous communities are the most vulnerable to the adverse impacts of current unsustainable consumption and production practices, but are also key to any effective solution. So they are also the change makers. And I think that the last intervention by WWF brought up the opportunity to be part of the nature positive economy roadmap. And I think this is also a very concrete tool that we should consider in our recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annika. And now we go to Jerzy. Jerzy, as representative of the co-hosts from Sweden's Ministry of Environment, would you like to say a few words before closing?
Thank you very much, Assad, and thank you to the coaches, Egypt and Finland, Miranda, Annika, Mustafa. As always, fantastic job, all of you. Naturally, the biggest thanks go to the participants. Without you, we wouldn't have any working group. And this is the second round, and the participation is still impressive, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of engagement and in terms of the richness of discussions and the richness of ideas. We heard a lot of good proposals, great ideas. Those have been summarized by the coaches, so I will not repeat them. Listen, we have a very clear mandate from the General Assembly for the leadership dialogues to focus on recommendations, and I think we are shaping the key messages and the recommendations before Stockholm Plus 50. We had a intense and rather fruitful journey from the first meeting at the beginning of March. I think it was when we were still working on the background paper, and the background paper was presented to the meeting in New York, discussed the key messages were distilled from there, and this is what we're working on now. Today, again, a very good discussion. We do have another chance. I think the third round of the informal working group is scheduled for, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the 17th of May. So there is another chance to further sharpen the messages and to bring them to Stockholm. And from the 17th of March to the meeting in Stockholm, it's only 2 weeks. So, you know, from a slow trade, we're on a Concord. No, Concord is no, I shouldn't say on environmental environmental meeting, from a slow train to a fast train, electric. Anyway, thank you very much. I think it's been great. The level of engagement, the level of ideas, the number of ideas, the quality of ideas. If we manage to keep this standard of work in Stockholm, I think we're in a very good shape. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerzy. So I just have the final thank you to the co-host, the co-chairs, and especially all the participants, each one of you who has provided ideas. And as Jerzy said, without your participation, this would not have been a really such a rich discussion and with so many of the concrete ideas. I think we are serving a noble cause together of trying to create a pathway starting from Stockholm Plus 50, which will put the world on track to achieve SDGs by 2050 and the 1.5 degree by 2050. We heard that on 17th of May, Jerzy just announced that we will have the third informal working group meeting, which will be still one more chance to further sharpen our messages and fill in any gaps that are still there in terms of finance, governance, and multilateralism ideas. So thank you so much for today's participation. We look forward to welcoming you on 17th of May for the third informal working group, and then on 2nd and 3rd of June in Stockholm for the final participation. So thank you so much and wish you all a very nice rest of the day. Thank you.